How's it going, everybody? I am DJ Riley, one of the hosts from Boys on the Bench, and I am back with my top 5 picks for these Thursday NBA matchups. Now, hopefully, you tailed some of my bets yesterday because we did end up going 4-0. We made 5 picks. De'Aaron Fox did not participate, so we did end up going 4-0 yesterday. Got that sweep and got our multiplier, so felt really good about that. Let me know in the comments below if you tailed some of those picks. And before we jump into today's picks, I did want to also mention full transparency with that daily grind screenshot. Didn't go well. We did only end up going 2 of 4. The previous day, day 1, we went at 4 and 2. So we had kind of the reverse. Now, when I was looking at Daily Grind Fantasy before making this video, there wasn't any really good value on there. Everything was around that low 53% going into the 52% in terms of these NBA games. Now, there's a ton of esports on there, so make sure you're checking that out. It's the link in the description. But I wanted to kind of do this, keep the trend going with this NBA motto. So also make sure you're following along with that X profile, because I will always be checking Daily Grind Fantasy like you should be as well, making sure that you're getting these positive EV bets. So once the sportsbooks start to change some of their odds and we start to get some good value, I will start making that, and I will have my day 3 posted there. Some days this happens on Daily Grind Fantasy, and it's nothing to do with Daily Grind. It's just the books. I mean, we were listening to the books, and it was kind of a bad variance, and that's just kind of the way that it rolls. But you have to keep sticking through it with this positive EV. You won't have a great record, but you'll end up paying out, because once they all cash out with positive EV. So before we also jump into this again, like I said, make sure you're checking out that X profile, because all of our picks are being posted there daily. My day 3 of this daily grind follow along is going there as well as some other picks that I have here as well. Now, again, this is Boys on the Bench. There are multiple guys who are posting on that channel, so another reason to go there and making sure that you're checking it out. Also, I did want to mention, yesterday we did end up hitting our pick of the day, which was the biggest sweat yesterday, and that was that D'Angelo Russell play. He didn't hit it until that last 2-minute mark, so it was definitely a big sweat, but that does give us 3 straight pick of the days that I have hit. So let's go ahead and start this video, like always, with our pick of the day, and that is Nick Richards going over 9.5 points. If you were following along a couple of days ago, I did go with Nick Richards for points plus rebounds versus this Milwaukee team, who he is facing again today. And if you saw in that one, he had 6 points and 7 rebounds, so it was 13. And I think we needed him to have 20 or 21 in that matchup. Didn't get it. And he didn't get it because he only saw 20 minutes of play. So he was actually highly effective. Again, had only 6 points in that matchup. So really, we just need to have 4 more for this matchup to hit that over. But in their prior matchup to that, he had 16 points on 30 minutes of play. And then in his first matchup of this season, only 7 minutes of play and 2 points. So that one's kind of that outlier game. And again, I think he's done very well versus this Milwaukee team. But that most recent matchup, it was a very large, probably a 30-point blowout versus them. And Nick Richards just had very little incentive to play. So he only saw 20 minutes, and that's why. Hoping today that that's not the case. They can keep it a little bit more competitive, and I think that Nick Richards is going to absolutely feast. Now, if we're looking at what Daily Grind Fantasy is giving us, it's a 52.5% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 130. Now, looking at recent performances, we can see that he's hit this in 3 out of his last 5, 6 out of his last 10, and even 18 out of his last 30 games, which is hitting it 60% of the time. Now, again, like I mentioned, Milwaukee just struggles versus centers, and that last game was a fluke for Richardson. Milwaukee currently allows the 9th most points in all of the NBA and the 5th most points to the center position. Prior to the All-Star break, Milwaukee allowed 5 out of the last 6 centers to hit their over, but they have prevented the last 2 centers that they've played after the All-Star break to hit their under. But as I mentioned, I think that with the way that their last matchup went versus that Bucks, or versus this Charlotte team where they blew them out and Nick Richards didn't play a ton, that most likely contributed to that as well. So again, magic number, if you followed along with this, is 6. I want him to have 6 field goal attempts, because if that happens, he cashes out 83% of the bets this season for this line, with there being 11 straight hits prior to this last matchup versus Milwaukee. So should have had 12. going into today, should have had 13. Again, Milwaukee versus that center position, 5th most points. So that is my pick of the day, but let's go ahead and move on to the next pick that I have for you, and that is Franz Wagner going over 1.5 3-pointers made. Does have a 1-game history versus this Utah Jazz team on November 2nd, where we saw him have 2 3-pointers made on 38 minutes of play. Daily Grind Fantasy is giving us a 52.2% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 126. So again, pretty decent. We really want that number around that 54%. 52.2 is good, not great. So pretty decent in terms of positive EV here. Recent performances, he's only hit this in 1 out of his last 5 and 4 out of his last 10. So he's not hitting this at necessarily a high rate, 20% over his last 5 and then 40% over his last 10. Utah, though, where I really like him in this matchup, Utah allows the most 3-pointers made in all of the NBA with 14.5 made per game, but then also the second highest 3-point percentage at 39% of the 3-pointer shot made versus them. 7 out of the last 9 small forwards have hit their over for 3-pointers made versus this Jazz team, which is that position that Wagner plays. Wagner is shoots a decent amount from behind the arc, where we see him shooting 5.5 3-pointers over his last 10 games. And in their last matchup, we also saw him shoot 5 3-pointers in that matchup. So I expect a lot of the same today. Versus this Jazz team, who again, it just struggles, and especially versus the small forward position. They allow the 4th most 3-pointers made to that position. So Franz Wagner comes into a very vulnerable position versus this bad Utah Jazz team. So really love him going for over 1.5 3-pointers made. But moving on to the next pick, and that is Jalen Brunson going over 7.0 assists. So they did bump this up. Line opened up at 6.5. Heavily favoriting the 6.5, so then they bumped it up to 7, and now sports books are having him at 7.5. So it doesn't have a head-to-head matchup this season versus this Golden State Warriors team. And if we look at what Daily Grind Fantasy is offering, it's at 49.5% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 113. Recent performances, if we look there, he's hit 3 out of his last 4, but there's the one push, and that's why it would have been kind of 3 or 4 out of the last 5, and then also 6 out of his last 9 with that same one push in there. So he's hitting this at a very high mark here recently. And that's mainly because Brunson continues to play a ton of minutes with all of these players who are still injured on this New York Knicks team. He's now played in 38 minutes of play in 3 straight games since returning from that All-Star break, and over that span, he's averaged 11 assists. He does have a tough matchup versus his Golden State Warriors team, who allows the least amount of assists to the point guard position. However, the last two out of the last 3 starting point guards have all hit their over versus them since returning from the All-Star break, with their most recent being Tyus Jones, who went for 17 assists. So they do very well versus point guards, but they have struggled here recently since returning from that All-Star break, where we see Brunson has just been thriving with the 11 assists over that span. So really love him to have at least 7. I mean, a push maybe. Wish we had jumped in on this at 6.5. We did get it at 7, and I still love this play because, I mean, again, I think we're looking at double digits here again today. But let's move on to the next pick, and that is Kevin Durant going over 33.5 points plus rebounds. Does have a 2-game history versus this Houston Rockets team, where his most recent matchup was earlier this week on February 23rd, where he had 39 points plus rebounds on 38 minutes of play, so easily cleared this line. But then he also cleared this line in their first matchup of the season, where he went for 37 points plus rebounds on 41 minutes of play. Daily Grind Fantasy, though, is only giving this a 49.6% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 114. Recent performances, he's hit this in 2 out of his last 5 and 6 out of his last 10, but he's also hit this in 5 out of his last 7 home games. So he's performing very well at home here recently, and he has another home matchup versus this Houston Rockets team. Durant has proven that he's going to be the go-to guy here lately in this Phoenix offense. He's managed 20-plus field goal attempts over his last 3 games since returning from this All-Star break, and not to mention, he's also averaged 7 free throw attempts over that span as well. So his usage has been great lately, while the Rockets defense has taken a bit of a dip here, where we see them losing 3 out of their last 4 games. So really love him in this matchup, despite it being a little bit of a tougher one, because Houston versus that power forward position allow the first least points plus rebounds. So again, though, Durant's been playing lights out. Rockets kind of sort of have been doing pretty good defensively, but not too great. Either way, Kevin Durant has proven that he can do this versus this Houston team. He's done it already twice this season, and I expect it to happen again. But let's go ahead and move on to my last pick of the day, and that is Bam Adebayo going over 21.5 points plus assists. Does not have a head-to-head matchup versus the Denver Nuggets this season, and if we look at what Daily Grind Fantasy is giving us, it's a 53.9% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 137. Recent performances is he's hit 4 out of his last 5 and 6 out of his last 10, but he's also hit this in 31 out of 48 games this season, which is 65%. So this line I feel like is very low for Bam Adebayo, especially hitting 80%, 4 out of his last 5. Bam has been efficient shooting here lately and has the potential for decent assist numbers today. He's hit 4 assists in 4 out of his last 6 games, with 2 of those being for 7+. So if we can even get 4, anywhere in that range of 4 to 7, I think we're sitting very good for Bam Adebayo to definitely hit this over today. Mainly because Adebayo is averaging 14 field goal attempts over his last 10 games, alongside 6 free throw attempts over his last 4 games as well. Since returning from the All-Star break, the Nuggets have allowed both centers to go for 20 plus points plus assist versus them, which is kind of that number that we're looking for Bam Adebayo. We just need 22, and they've allowed the 2 centers that they've faced after this All-Star break to go for 20 plus. Denver versus the center position, points plus assists, they are very good. Top 10, allowing the 9th least in all of the NBA. But regardless, still love the way that Bam is playing at this point in the season, and I expect him to go over again today. So anyways, everybody, these are my top 5 picks. As always, let me know in the comments which ones you're tailing, which ones you're fading. Again, which pick I may have missed out on. Make sure you're checking out that X profile, because more picks will be being dropped there daily. Also, make sure you're checking out Daily Grind Fantasy, because guys, I got to get y'all on that positive EV trend. Long term, it's where it's at. It's where it's at. But nonetheless, best of luck to y'all, and let's have a good day today, and let's keep this hot streak rolling. I will see y'all tomorrow.